going to ask Paul to define what we're our subject today. What is our subject? And then I'm going to ask you to pass the microphone and each of you introduce yourself. Paul, here you go.
So you need me to speak into this, correct? All right. All right. I'm going to use this podium because this contains all of my cheesy jokes. And Bob, I'm going to answer that question, but I'm going to say something first. So, first of all, thank you all for being here. And I don't know if anyone saw this or noted that the White House Correspondents' Dinner was Friday night. And it was, you know, the second effort at that, because the first one got interrupted, of course. But, you know, I noted that the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and I'm being a political nerd, I watched it. It celebrated the First Amendment and talked a lot about freedom of the press, which we all appreciate and are grateful for. But I would note that the First Amendment also contains five important freedoms that we all enjoy. There's freedom of the press, there's freedom of speech, there's freedom to peaceably assembly, and two important ones as we think about advocacy and faith. That's freedom of religion and freedom to petition your government for a redress of grievances. And I think it's the latter, petitioning government for a redress of grievances, that's the foundation of advocacy. And, you know, I have opportunity to talk about this to people. I always make that point. I think it's an important baseline for everybody to have. That's my opinion. I think other people share that. But to your question, Bob, thank you. And I hadn't thought about this till you asked it last night over email. The definition of advocacy, I guess that everybody has maybe a different point of view on that and would say different words, but maybe there's some common things. And to me, it is supporting or promoting a cause or an idea, working to influence a decision by public policymakers. And in the case of Washington, that's what we do. We try to make the case, make an argument to persuade a particular or influence a particular public policy. And a lot of times it's a public policy that exists in the conversation already that members of Congress and members of the administration are thinking about, working on. And a lot of times, like in my case, it's stuff they don't even know about. And so my job is to educate them as to why it might be important and to why you might want to involve yourselves in that. The last thing I'll say about the definition of advocacy is I think there's a lot of it that's very similar to selling. But instead of selling a product, you're selling an idea. You're selling a thought. And I know there are a lot of people in this congregation who work in the advocacy and lobbying space who could do this. I guess we drew the short straw, but you know, I think everyone would agree that it's, you know, you're selling an idea. And so you make every effort to convince people and come up with arguments and strategies to persuade them to maybe come to your side on an issue, the side of your clients or your employer. So I don't want to like hog this, but I just kind of wanted to lay that groundwork, Bob. Thank you for asking that question. I think that's the definition.
Would you say something about how you fit into advocacy? Something about who you are?
We could do that, but why don't we?
Yeah.
We'll all do it.
We'll all do it. Briefly.
Yeah.
Okay. Before we get to the intro parts, we also want to talk a little bit about Baptist history and how Baptists historically have been advocates. This is not something that is new to people of our faith tradition. And then I promise the three of us are going to do an intro as to who we are and what types of advocacy that we have done. So, as most of you are probably aware, colonial Baptists were dissenters. We were a small minority religious group. We were not popular. We were the wrong kind of Christian. And so our pastors and our leaders were imprisoned, they were fined, they were whipped, they were persecuted by the state, all because we dared to worship God in a slightly different way than the official state churches of the early days. And so when it comes to advocacy, we have, Baptists have the scars to prove that sometimes you have to stand up to the government, right? And we became famous because we stood up not only for ourselves, but we stood up for all people when it comes to religious liberty. We didn't just advocate that Baptists should be free to worship the way we see fit. We thought everyone should be free, whether they were Mohammedans, is what they were called at the time, who we would now refer to as Muslims. We advocated for all kinds of religious traditions. We advocated for people who worshipped multiple gods, people who worshiped no God, and so it was a very core idea for who we are. But even Presbyterians, yes. So all God's children. So,
And Catholic.
yes.
Predetermined, Bob.
So, there are two really famous stories about Pastor John Leland, who the seminary is named for, that many of y'all might have a connection with. He's also known as Elder John Leland. One of them is how Baptists are responsible for the First Amendment, and that's the story y'all might know, and so I'm going to tell the other story. I'm happy to tell the First Amendment story, too, at some point, if y'all would like to hear it. So, January 1st, 1802, famous date in Baptist history for two reasons. One is the letter that President Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptist. Is anyone familiar with what that letter is? All right. That's where President Jefferson said the First Amendment religious freedom clauses, both of the clauses in the First Amendment that protect religion in two different ways, the shorthand for those is that they build a wall separating church and state. So that is the first time that a government official used that phrase, largely believed to have been borrowed from Roger Williams, one of our Baptist founders who founded the colony of Rhode Island. And so there's been speculation as to why did Jefferson decide to write the letter on January 1st, 1802. Right? He had gotten the letter a few days before. It hadn't been a priority to respond. He was newly elected, so he was getting letters from lots of people congratulating him. So what might have sparked him to respond to this small religious group up in Connecticut? Like, why would you pick this time? Something else happened on January 1st, 1802 that connects Baptists to advocacy and President Jefferson. Does anyone know the event that happened on that day?
The big cheese.
The mammoth cheese made it to Washington, D.C. Right. The mammoth cheese.
Mammoth cheese.
Big cheese.
So Pastor Leland, when he had been in Virginia, he was basically a lobbyist, is what we would call him today. And so he, in addition to his preaching duties, he also was tasked by the other Virginia Baptist leaders to interact with government officials and to write petitions and to try to drum up support, especially for religious freedom and the Baptist perception of religious freedom. All right. And so at this point, Leland is back in Massachusetts. He has met Jefferson before and knows several of the leaders. And he thinks we need to do something really big to show our support for Jefferson. So this was the first time that someone who wasn't a Federalist had won the presidency. So it was a change in party, right? It was a new president coming in. And so this is our time to lift up our support for religious freedom in a new way. And so he goes to the ladies of Cheshire Baptist Church in Massachusetts and said, we're going to make a big block of cheese, right? Whoever thought cheese had to do with advocacy? Cool. Yeah. But they are Democratic Republicans, and so they decide that this has to be a freeman's block of cheese. So no enslaved individuals were allowed to work on it, and no milk from cows owned by enslavers were allowed to contribute to the creation of this cheese, right? Because they were thinking about the totality of the message that they were sending to the capital. And so 900 cows contribute milk to create this really big block of cheese. The name mammoth cheese was actually a slur to try to by the Federalists to try to detract from it and make fun of it and and try to draw attention away from it. It just amplified the cheese. So it took 3 weeks after the cheese had been made to bring it down to D.C. from Massachusetts. And so John Leland is accompanying the cheese all the way down, right? Whenever they would stop in town, they would draw a crowd. I don't know what was happening in December of 1801, but apparently when the cheese stopped in town, you wanted to go see it, right? So he took that occasion to preach about religious freedom every time they stopped. So he was garnering, he was trying to build his movement here. We would call it today, he was trying to go viral, right? He wanted this message to spread. He wanted everyone to be tapped into it. So it takes them 3 weeks. They get down to D.C. They arrive at the White House on January 1st, 1802, and go to President Jefferson with this mammoth block of cheese. Right? I don't know what Jefferson thought. I'm not sure anyone ever asked for it. But any guesses on how big a block of cheese has to be to get the nickname
It was a
mammoth?
round of cheese.
I'm not sure because they used a cider press, and so I don't know. The big wheel of cheese was from the President Jackson administration, copying what the Baptists had done here.
The same one.
So, no, it lasted at least 3 years in the White House, and not really sure like what happened in the end. So yeah. So inscribed on the cheese, because again, they were looking for a total message that they were sending to White House. And again, you have a new president from a new party. Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God, is what they carved into this block of cheese. The cheese was 4 feet wide and 15 inches thick. It weighed 1,235 pounds. So that is a mammoth cheese, right? Jefferson opposed citizens giving gifts to elected officials, so he gave them $200 to pay for the cheese, and that is estimated that might have been double the value of the cheese, but it's hard to put into value what a 1,200-pound block of cheese would cost, because I don't know that there's much of a market for that.
Yeah.
And so the mammoth cheese inspired a mammoth loaf that the U.S. Navy gave to President Jefferson 2 years later. And then in 1835, the big wheel of cheese was given to President Andrew Jackson from some New York farmers. And that is what inspired the West Wing episode for the West Wing aficionados, Big Block of Cheese Day. It was actually the Jackson cheese, but that had been inspired by the Baptist cheese to Jefferson in 1801. So this is it's a fun story, but advocacy goes back. It's part of who we are as Baptists. It is part of our DNA. Advocacy takes many forms, and from our beginnings, but Baptists have not been afraid to step forward, even if it meant public ridicule, to stand for what we believed in.
Probably add Quakers to that list.
Yes,
The Quakers were very active in Philadelphia. So I grew up I was born in Philadelphia, right outside of Philly. And so the Quakers, when the Continental Congress met, were actually advocating for abolition. So religion and religious organizations, right from the founding of our nation, we're there. So Bob, what do you want us to do now? You want us to go through introductions?
I want each of you to give your full name.
Okay. Full name, all right.
And how you have been drawn into advocacy.
Okay, and our current roles? You want to?
Yeah, well, in your current role.
Okay. So my name is Stanley Michael Skocki III. Okay. Right. Full name, that's right. Been a member here at the church, geez, how many years now? Over 30 years. My current role is I'm the Associate Vice President of Government Affairs at The Ohio State University. You go Bucks, OH, right? So I've been in that role for almost 10 years. I said I was born in Philadelphia, but my family moved to Ohio when I was pretty young, and I went to Ohio State. So it's a real honor to be in that role. Give you a little background about the role itself. So I run the Office of Government Affairs here in D.C., and we do advocacy on behalf of The Ohio State University. And we're a big place. So there's 2 land grants in Ohio. We're the oldest and the largest, founded in 1870. And we represent, we have about almost 70,000 students, almost 50,000 employees, 15 different colleges. We have regional campuses all across the state. So we're a big place. And jokingly, people will come up to me and say, why do we need an Office of Government Affairs? And I say there's about 1.8 billion reasons why. And it ties with a lot of the money and resources, as well as our connection to the federal government. So we work closely with our friends at the Department of Education, of course, Department of Defense, Department of Labor, so on and so forth. So it's a lot of activity there. Thank you. Yep.
Before you pass, tell people what your prior positions were.
So yeah, before joining this, thank you, Kevin, for the question. So I've been in government affairs and working with government for the last almost 35 years. So I was drawn to government and history and politics, probably like us all, at a young age, and I started working for a member of Congress back in Ohio in his district office, and got a job here in D.C. And I worked in the House of Representatives for that member, and as well as another member. Worked on committee, worked in leadership, then went over to the Senate and worked for my home state senator, Mike DeWine, who's currently the governor of Ohio. And then left there and went into private practice and did advocacy. Got to know Paul and Ron. Where's Ron Kelly? There's Ron. So got to work there and represent clients. And as I mentioned before, I came on board with Ohio State about 10 years ago.
So I'm Jennifer Hawks. I guess my full title would be Reverend Jennifer Hawks, thanks to the people at McLean. For me, my journey into advocacy began when I was very little. My granddad was a former state legislator in the state of Tennessee, so I grew up with his stories of how policy can help people and how we pass laws to make things better for people. And I was the nerd in the family, so I would sit and listen to all of his stories and really loved it. And so some of my most prized possessions are some of his possessions from when he was a legislator. I've got them in my office and at my home. But my first foray into advocacy was when I was in law school. It's common for law students to do some type of clinical experience just to try to get a little bit of experience in the real world and what it means to be a lawyer. And my professor had this bright idea that we should have a legislative clinic. We should let law students look at problems and figure out a solution and then try to go fight for it and see if we can get that enacted. It's a pretty common thing now, but it was a little new back in the early 2000s. And I was selected as one of the first 4 students to be in this first cohort. And our professor, what it still is, Mississippi's leading expert on family law. So we were looking at family law issues since that's what our professor knew best. And there was a loophole in child custody laws that 47 other states had managed to solve, but Mississippi was one of 3 that had not tried to address it. So we took that up as our challenge. She was responsible for getting renters' rights put into state law in the state of Mississippi, and it took her 10 years. So she prepared us for hard work. This is going to take multiple years. There's going to be a lot of students who work on this, and y'all are just the first group, but we need to get off to a good start, right? So we were ready. We managed to get two hearings on our bill, which was great. Our professor was the expert witness at the first one, and we got to testify at the second one. And I still remember sitting in that environment. We're sitting at the expert witness table, looking up at the committee, and I thought to myself, even as an introvert, if I could do this for the rest of my life, where I'm the expert and someone is asking me questions that I get to answer, like, I'll be set. Like, this is awesome, right? It was great. So I was rather disappointed that no one joined us in working for our bill. We couldn't get the religious groups on. We couldn't get other stakeholders to come on board. But like we continued to fight. So we drove the 3-ish hours round trip to the state capitol a couple times a week for several weeks. Academically, it was my worst semester in law school. Made C's in 2 classes, which is the only C's I've ever made in my life. But it's because I was at the state capitol for most of the semester, and so I was not in class at those times. Surprise to everyone, we got the bill passed. Now, we accidentally traded on our last names, which we didn't know we were going to be doing. And when we learned about it, we actually didn't correct the record. So when we were testifying at that hearing, one of the committee members slipped me a note, like passed it down to his aide, who passed it around and brought it over to me. And the note said how much this legislator had enjoyed having dinner with my parents a few weeks ago. Now, I'm from Memphis, so not far from Mississippi, but my parents didn't know anyone in state government in the state of Mississippi. And it turns out the Republican lieutenant governor at the time, his name was Bill Hawks, no relation to me. Bill Hawks had a daughter named Jennifer who was an attorney. So clearly this legislator just thought, oh, I messed up. She must still just be in law school going to be an attorney instead of an attorney. But he wanted me to know that he was a friend and he could be counted on, and so he had slipped me this note. I never corrected the record. To be fair, I didn't have an opportunity, but I also didn't seek that out either. Because why look a gift horse in the mouth, right? One of the other members of our cohort, she was the daughter of a former Speaker of the House from the Democratic side, who was very well respected, and so she got a lot of goodwill votes, for her dad and for his legacy and for his good work. So it surprised everyone that in the year we introduced this brand new bill with this brand new idea for the state of Mississippi, that it got passed. Now the governor wouldn't sign it. So we didn't get a signing ceremony. That would have been really cool to have been a part of that. But we did, in the state of Mississippi, if the governor doesn't veto a law, it becomes law. So it did become law after the time to veto had expired. So that was kind of my first taste of advocacy, and I really liked it. I didn't get a chance to do it again until seminary. And so in seminary, we're supposed to be placed with pastors or with churches to kind of learn kind of like a clinical in law school, like how to learn how to be a pastor and how to learn how to be a religious leader. And so I took an internship with the division within Texas Baptist that does their lobbying in Austin. So it's the Christian Life Commission. So I worked there for a semester, learning from some great people, learning how to build a coalition, learning how to say no to good things, because there's just so much that needs to be advocated for. I learned sometimes that a stakeholder makes you do a path that you know isn't going to work, but it's so important to them that you have to give them their shot. So I learned a whole lot of lessons and really enjoyed that formative time. After I finished seminary, I came up here in 2014 to work at the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty, where I did their Capitol Hill work, and I went and spoke at churches, trying to help inspire college students in churches on how they can get involved in the work for religious freedom from wherever they are. And then about 2.5 years ago, I became the Director of Advocacy for the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. And so I direct their Capitol Hill work and also speak and preach in churches, and I host groups from our churches that come to DC, all in an effort to inspire them to find their advocacy voice, and I'm a resource for them when they figure out what it is they want to work on. I work on a few issues, but that is not meant to limit what our churches work on, so I want to help them find what's important to them and what's important to their community, what stories have they been entrusted with, and how can we lift those up in the public square.
Thank you, Jennifer Hawks, the real Jennifer Hawks, not the imposter.
Right. There's now 2 of us. So.
Excellent. So I'm Paul Kelly, and I'm in the family business. So my dad did this work here in Washington. He ran the government relations office for a domestic steel industry, a domestic steel company based in Cleveland, Ohio. It was called Republic Steel. It was a big deal in the 60s, 70s, and even in the early 80s. But I grew up on a steady diet of, the government's in our business. They're not letting us do what we need to do to be, productive and blah, blah. And so, around the dinner table, we talked about, regulations related to the coal slurry pipeline and stuff like that. And I'm like, cool, check it out. So, it was like I said, the family business. So I was always interested in politics and in government and in the legislative process and the policymaking process through the federal agencies because of my dad. So, I took a job. I answered an ad in the newspaper. Remember that? They don't do that anymore.
No, we don't.
But, so I answered an ad, and I got a job with a healthcare trade association early when I was in my mid to late 20s, and that sort of launched my career. And I started talking this morning about the importance of the First Amendment, and my colleagues have talked about this too. And one of the points I made is that the right to petition government for a redress of grievances, I believe, and I think a lot of people believe, is a foundation for lobbying, for advocacy work in the United States. And so, in my opinion, that also means it's available to everybody, that you don't need any particular kind of credential. You just have to have an interest, and you have to persuade somebody that you're good enough to make a case on their behalf. You don't have to be a lawyer. although there are many good lawyers many lawyers who are good lobbyists. You don't have to be a former congressional staff member, or there are a ton of those, including Stan, who are excellent lobbyists. But you don't have to have any particular credential to do this, because the First Amendment guarantees you the opportunity to do this. So I like that. It's very American. In my opinion, it is, because it's in the First Amendment, it was intended by the founders of the nation that people feed back to their government, and they talk to them, and they petition their government when there's a problem. So I think it's a very American thing, and I'm very proud to be in it. And so like I said, I got a healthcare job early on with the Healthcare Trade Association, so I've kind of come up the ranks and developed a little bit of expertise in healthcare, enough to fool people on Capitol Hill. So I kind of am in the healthcare policy space, and so I've lobbied Congress and the administration since the 1980s. I remember when Stan was on the Hill. I used to go talk to him every once in a while, and now I'm talking to his son, who's also on the Hill. So it's just great, and I really enjoy it.
So let me just suggest that you say whatever you want to and pass the mic back and forth. And if you want to open it up to questions from your auditors, you can do that too.
Want to hear a joke? All right. Bob asked the definition of advocacy. Sure, fine. We covered that. But does anyone know the definition of a lobbyist? My father-in-law told me that the definition of a lobbyist is the people you hire to protect you from the people you elect. I thought that was pretty good.
What do you want to start with? Maybe our faith journey a little bit? Maybe how we talk about that? Or?
And the idea is, how has your work in advocacy enriched your own faith?
Enrich our own faith. That's interesting. It's enriched it. It also challenged it too as well. So little story about myself, about my faith journey. So I'm actually here in this church really because of my work. Because my chief of staff was Alan Martin, who was a long-standing member here at McLean Baptist Church. As most of you know, I was raised Catholic. Sue Ellen was raised Lutheran. When I went to Capitol Hill, I was working. We were looking for a church. And Alan overheard the conversation, said, "Stan, you need to come to my church." And I said, "Okay. I'm Catholic, by the way. You're Baptist." And he said, "Show up here at 9:30 in the morning." So Sue Ellen and I, Sue Ellen was like, "We're going to go to a Baptist church." I said, "Yeah, we're going to give it a try." Show up at 9:30, and you remember in the sign out front, it says service starts at 11. And I was like, "Alan, why are we here at 9:30? He goes, "Well, you have to go to Sunday school." And I'm like, "Sunday school? We don't really have that as part of our tradition." So Alan drops us off at the Logos class and then leaves. And we're looking around the room, and I'm going, "Oh, my goodness, we don't know anybody in this room." And so Alan's looking at me, grabbing my arm, and we sat down. And to this day, we're friends with everybody in that room. And that was 30-plus years ago. So that's interesting about how the faith intersects. I think I'm really here in D.C. because of my faith, to be honest with you. When I was at Ohio State, sitting there at the Oval, kind of was in church, but not super active in church. I had, I was wondering what the future holds, and I had this guy tap me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, hi, my name is such and such, and would you like to come to a Bible study?" And I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'll come." And through that, got reignited back into faith. And I really heard that calling, saying, "Stan, you need to," I didn't know where I was going to do. And so I heard that calling, and I started to try to intern more involved with advocacy. Started working with a member of Congress who, by the way, was a strong man of faith. And so through that, we started doing Bible studies, actually. And when I came to Capitol Hill, we actually had a group of staffers that would get together at least once a week to do Bible study. Was really fascinated with the chaplains in the House and Senate. We have organized chaplains. So when I went there, they would actually organize Bible study. So I went over to the Senate side. The chaplain of the Senate put together a Bible study for congressional staff and got to know them. Got to know other Buckeyes. I'm looking at my fellow Buckeye here. So the faith was there. Now, it's also challenged. There's decisions. There's things that you may not agree with. There's things that challenge your faith. There's also the process. We talk a lot about the First Amendment. I also hearken back to the kind of the blocks, the building blocks of the Constitution, Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3, which establish the federal government. The Congress, Article 1, Article 2, the executive branch, and Article 3, the judiciary branch. So with that, that gives us the ability to work. And that's where a lot of the sausage, and you probably heard this, the sausage is made. It's not always pretty. Legislative process, the advocacy process is not pretty. And I've encountered some of those challenges over the years. And I've also, it's interesting, we always talk about trying to change the world, we do. Sometimes we try to make it a little less worse because there's a lot of ideas out there. And some of these ideas, even though they're well-intentioned, can have some serious ramifications. And that's why checks and balances and advocacy is so important. So one of the roles we play in advocacy, we talk about the passion, the energy, but also the education, just educating staff, educating members, because members of Congress, for example, represent about 800,000 people in their districts. Senators can represent, like in Ohio, almost 13 million people. So let that sink in for a little bit. All the cities, the towns, the diversity of the nation. A lot of different universities. We have, gosh, probably 70 different universities in Ohio alone. So there's a lot of stuff going on. But anyways, going back to the faith. The faith was really important to me, and it obviously still is. But it really, I think, really brought me here. So I'll leave on that point.
Well, for me, I do the lobbying I do is slightly different from my colleagues up here, and so my faith is probably a little more connected to my advocacy work because I work for a faith-based group, and so it is my faith that helps lead. Like, what are we going to work on? How are we going to work on this? What coalitions are we going to be a part of? And we have taken the position, like many religious denominations, that we don't advocate for ourselves. So I don't advocate about like pastor retirement policy or like pastor benefits and things like that. We have friends who do that, and we certainly provide expertise to those friends. But we see it as our duty to lift up the voices of those who don't have easy access to Capitol Hill. So we work on anti-poverty issues, we work on global migration issues, we work on global church issues, which is religious freedom and racial justice and some other issues like that. And so that's where our focus lies. And it's a challenge because most of my religious counterparts, they have resolutions that their denomination passes when they get together for their annual meeting or biannual or triannual, whenever their group meets together. They pass resolutions on any number of issues that you could name in culture and society and politics, and that gives their government affairs office a playbook of these are the issues we're going to work on because we have a resolution that says this is important to our denomination. We at CBF do not do resolutions. We were founded out of the trauma of being kicked out of the SBC, in part over fights over these types of resolutions. And so that's one of our like core foundational things. We will not do resolutions. So my job would be made easier if CBF would change that policy. I'm the only person in CBF life whose job would be made easier if we change that policy. So I have to figure out, how do I speak for CBF? I have more than 1,400 local churches. They're in different contexts. They're in different socioeconomic brackets. They speak different languages. They have different racial makeups. Some are in the north, a lot are in the south. We have some out west. So issues, water issues to my western churches are really important. Not so important to my churches in Georgia and Alabama. They care about water, but it's not a top of mind issue for them, right? So my job is really trying to how do I balance? How do I figure out what is CBF's work and what is the work of my local church? Like, when do I need to turn it over to them and be their support and be their advocate and help connect them to the right people? And when is it mine to take on? So it creates an interesting challenge, not necessarily theologically, but when it comes to Baptist polity and who we are as Baptist. I work with our chaplains. We have chaplains at home and abroad. So many of the chaplains oppose some of the recent changes that have been proposed for military chaplains. So I'm working with them on how to advocate from a chaplain perspective as to how we could make this better. A lot of our chaplains oppose the public school chaplains that are trying to get created. And so I work with them on how to fight that at the state level. It's not a national issue, at least not yet. And so I love the diversity of what I get to do. I love that every time I go to a church and I do an advocacy training. My one-liner takeaway for an advocacy training is, if you can have a conversation, you can be an advocate. That's all it takes. It can be written, it can be verbal, it can be interpretive dance. If you can have a conversation. So, you know.
I'd like to see Stan do that.
So as long as you can have a conversation in some medium, in some format, that's all it takes to be an advocate. And so I love seeing the light bulb come on for our churches. We have Sunday school classes that have taken on issues. We have Bible studies that have taken on issues. We have entire churches that have. And it's just fun to see people go from, this is something that these professionals do, right, to something, oh, no, wait, this is mine to do. This is in the Constitution. This is something I'm supposed to do as a citizen of this country to help make our country better, right? And so those are some of the things that I love about my job and how it intersects with the faith.
Lucky for me, not everyone knows how to do it, and so I give them advice on how to do it. But so, you know, it's really clear, and I appreciate the point that advocacy and lobbying can do so much good. It helps in the education field. It helps with, you know, some of these social justice issues that Jennifer was just talking about. I work in healthcare, you know, a lot of healthcare policy. So it's taken me a while to sort of appreciate how this relates to my faith. But ultimately, it's all about helping people. You know, you help them and you help them and I help them by helping make sure people have access to certain procedures and healthcare insurance and access to things, and all that's really important. And ultimately, you know, that's what our faith is about. It's about helping other folks, about loving your neighbor, even loving your enemy, as hard as that is. And so, you know, I've recently, thanks to this church, in great measure, you know, come to realize how important that is, and that's a real aspect of what I do. And I try to bring that to, you know, the conversations I have with clients and other groups I'm working with on particular issues. So that's, yeah, for me, that's the connection. I'm going to give you some quick, I'm going to give you a quick fact before I recognize you for a question. So there are 13,000 registered lobbyists in Washington, D.C. And so the ratio to members of Congress is 24 registered lobbyists for every member of Congress. So that's interesting. And, you know, we talked about a lot of the benefit, and I think the educating members on certain issues is really important. When I was a young lobbyist, you remember Congressman Pete Stark from California, a liberal member from Northern California. He was the chairman of the Health Subcommittee of Ways and Means. So, you know, we had to lobby him, but he'd always talk about how, you know, in Washington, we need education because there are a lot of good ideas. You know, for every body part and every disease, there's a lobbying group. And, you know, we're not experts, so we need you guys to kind of tell us what's going on. So that education role is really important.
Because one other point I'll make is the importance of relationships. So everyone I lobby, to me, I look at it as a marathon, not a sprint. And so just building those relationships, and not everyone's going to say yes when you walk in the door. A lot of times they won't even know what the topic is or may not know the details, but spend that extra time to invest in a relationship. Sometimes the answers are no, sometimes they're maybe, sometimes they're yes, or maybe it's a slight yes, but it varies. But it's really important to build that relationship, understand where people are coming from, understand their background, the challenges that are up there. So I found that to be, and through that we've developed friendships. So Paul Kelly used to come in, lobby me. Ron Killen looking there. We've had chances. Bill Crosby, I don't know if he's here, but Bill used to work on the Rules Committee. So I see Bill at different markups and such. So relationships. I do look at the Bible, and you read some stories. I don't know how John the Baptist, how he would have been as an advocate in our world. He had a much aggressive approach. Same thing, we talked about Paul.
He would offer you a locust.
Locust instead of cheese. No cheese, locust. Yeah, you can't. there's rules now about that stuff. So anyways, going back to relationships are critically important. So questions at this point?
Sorry, Gina.
Gene.
We'll pass the mic here. So.
No, you don't need to. You don't need to.
Oh, we don't need to?
We
Okay.
have
Okay.
we have
that's
a directional
for-
mic.
Oh, this is- okay.
A lot of the challenges you have is you have so many different points of view and perspectives. And the challenge is, how do you know what is the right thing to do? You have people advocating for all kinds of different things, and how do you sort that out? How do you sort the wheat from the chaff so you're confident?
No, go ahead, just to finish it, then what? Okay.
What you're doing?
I'd like to give you a real, actually, I'll give you a real world example because I was thinking
Well,
of
I
exactly that.
remember when I was on the senator's
Well, I
staff,
can,
and
well, I
ADA
can,
was
I
a
was on the
language.
receiving side, so at one time I had a job, and I was actually like a technical advisor to an organization called the Department of Defense Modeling and Simulation Office. And our mission at the time was when modeling and simulation was like AI was taking over the world, to make sure that we had a plan across the Department of Defense. So I went with the head of the office at that time. We actually worked for the Secretary of, it was the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition was who we worked for, real big wig SES. So we had our first budget was $100 million to allocate funds to progress advanced modeling and simulation. So we got a call to go over to a great senator's office from the state of Alaska. And we met with his staff. We actually didn't know what was going on at the time. So there were only two of us, and we met with his staff. And the staff said that the senator was reviewing our budget, which was a little line. I mean, like $100 million is peanuts, right? It's a piece of peanuts. But for $100 million for us, it's the whole world. And they said that, and they handed us a new copy of our budget.
Yeah.
And in there it said that we were going to recognize the expertise at the University of Alaska from modeling and simulation. So some person from the University of Alaska went to the senator and said, we want some money. So, I mean, the bottom line is at the meeting that the two of us who represented that, so they said in their budget it's going to be $5 million. And so I still don't know anybody from the University of Alaska or anything the organization has done that has any expertise in modeling and simulation. That's like 15 years later. And so I sitting there, do the right thing. Yeah. We said, great idea. For $95 million, you can have 5.
Yeah.
End of meeting, end
Compromise.
of discussion. The budget got changed. The University of Alaska got $5 million. Our only responsibility basically was to whoever they gave us a point of contacts and say, agree on what they were going to do for $5 million. I don't think they ever produced anything productive, but for what that person was advocating for the University of Alaska, I was on the receiving end.
I have a friend and colleague at the University of Alaska, so I'm sure they could do it. So, yeah. And I think I know the senator who you're talking about, so it's probably Ted Stevens.
He's not,
Yeah. But yeah, and members of Congress advocate for their states and their districts, and so that's part of the game. They do try to grab stuff. So,
Right. So I mean that if we were being real honest, we would have said, wait a minute, there's what you want to do is they want to be that in the future, so we'll give them startup money. But they had nothing to add.
I think I'm glad you added that to Gene's question, because there are a lot of different ideas out there, and as Stan indicated, one of the first techniques you learn is you got to connect this to somebody's district or state. In other words, why should they care about this?
Well, that's a piece, but you also want to connect something that's real, not modeling and simulation, and the technology side of things. There's a lot of refinement there. That's some of it works, some of it doesn't work, some of it's You're advocating for DoD modeling and simulation, and they don't necessarily have the expertise that is out in Silicon Valley. So you know, do you really want to give them $100 million? Or maybe you want to give them a lot more than that because they need to build that capability. And do they have the competence and do they have the capability to even use it if they got the money?
And we always analyze things and said, who's the best to do that?
Yeah.
Commercial, give the, you know, we'd say whoever the commercial world is.
But you have to have some sort of, you know,
But we thought.
yeah, you know, so how do you,
You got a bunch of good arguments, but why would they give a crap? You know,
Yeah.
that's what it boils down to. You got to convince them that, well, this is important for you because, I mean, the first thing my dad taught me about lobbying was you always make sure it's their idea. You know, it's never your idea. You know, you may, yeah, right. You know, there's only room for one ego in that relationship, and it ain't yours. You know, it's the members. It's a member of Congress. It's the policymaker in you know, some agency. So, you know, all that's important. You know, I always tell my clients, you really got to make the case and lay it out as best you can. But also, as important, you got to make sure there's a connection. You're asking a policymaker to help you. You're asking a lawmaker to help you. Figure out a way it will appeal to them. What do they care about? They care about their state and their district. I've said enough.
Another question.
Yeah.
How do you get appointments to be heard, and do you get turned down? I mean, what's the procedure to speak to a member or their staff or whatever?
Just call or email them.
And
So.
are they obliged to respond one way or the other? Can they say no?
Yes. Yes, they can say no. So the Reverend in front of my name gets me appointments that some of my coalition partners can't get, to be honest. Yeah. So, but also just being the squeaky wheel. So like,
Say that again.
just being the squeaky wheel. So like following back up, like, hey, I emailed you last week, you know, trying to get an appointment, would love to come in and talk about this issue. And so it's always best if you're a constituent reaching out to your member. It's harder when you're reaching out to someone else saying, I'm so like I have to find a church in that area. Like I'm reaching out to you, and there's a church in your district, and you know, so, again, to make them care, and why should they spend their time talking to us? But yeah, I mean, it's picking up a phone call, calling the Capitol switchboard. You know, it can be as easy as that. You're going to meet with a staffer for the most part, and I always tell my folks that you should not overlook meeting with the staffer because some of them get disappointed. They think they're going to meet with their senator, and so we have to hold their hand a little bit. Because if you talk to the staffer and you can convince the staffer, then you've got an advocate inside the office, right? And the member is going to tell you what they think that you want to hear so they can get to their next meeting. It's probably not going to stick with them unless it's their core issue that they just are most passionate about. And when you meet with the staffer's probably 22. You may have to meet walking the hall because they've got to get from one hearing, to the next. So like I have a whole training on how to have a good meeting, but it starts with an email or a phone call.
Little context with that. So when I worked on the Hill, I would get hundreds of requests to meet. And of course you have the senator's schedule or the House member's schedule or the committee's schedule. So you're just trying to triage that. So persistence is important. Also clearly identifying what it is you want to talk about. If you are from the district, it's important. Don't forget about district staff too as well. There's people locally that you can talk to. So going in there and engaging. And then you're not going to accomplish everything with one meeting. I usually say it takes about 3 or 4 meetings to break through, so that consistency going back and forth. What I found is after about 2 or 3 meetings, I was like, oh my goodness, I know this person now. There's a level of trust there. We may not agree on every issue, but I at least know who they are, and I value their input. And then you never know where things may connect. So we had Ron over there, and then here. So.
I just wonder if you might each share examples of what it's like when you train and bring somebody in to help lobby the issue with you.
Let's start, Paul.
Say that again?
Bring him into the
If you're
office.
bringing in a client,
Bring
or
a
if you're
client.
bringing in some of the university people, what's it like? What's their experience like when they when you do that?
It ranges, and it's a good question because you always want to bring in an expert, but so there's the art of the one-pager in our business, right? I mean, these are complex issues, undoubtedly, but you got to boil it down to a paragraph. You got to have an elevator speech, and so I think the first thing you do is you try to convince people, and we're going to boil this down. So that's what we help them with. That's the art of government relations and advocacy. It's like, we're going to make this so it's like impactful and it's short. And so you try to keep them, and smart scientist people that you deal with, that's probably really hard because they got a lot to say.
They think they need 3 hours.
Yeah. You ain't got 3 hours. You got 20 minutes at best, right? So that's my thought on that.
I have college students who come to DC like on their spring break, and so teaching them how to go have their first meeting ever in a professional context. So I have tips on just like how to have a good meeting like as a professional adult, and, so that they can learn those things. And then also like bring in pastors and lay leaders, and so just try to have good like one-on-one conversation and help them get to the point, like what is it you want them to take away from this meeting, because that you've got to lead with that, you've got to put it in the middle, and you got to end with it too, like because that is the takeaway, and you can't have 15 takeaways, so we need 1 or 2, and we can have handouts to leave behind, and then I always encourage my folks, if you asked your representative to give a 1-minute floor speech on the value of public education during the time where they can give floor speeches on any topic, and they do that, send an email saying thank you. Show that you were paying attention and that you were appreciative that they took this action. You don't have to break down the speech. You don't have to say, well, you should have mentioned this school, or should but just if you go into an office, if you get a meeting and you make an ask and they actually do the ask that you wanted, almost no one comes back and says thank you. And so it's a hard job for staffers. Like they're going out on a limb to push your idea, and then it happens, and it's like, and then just come back. Okay, well now I need you to do this, and it's like, well let's just basic good manners can go a long way in building that relationship for the next thing that we're going to ask of you. So.
That's a great question, Ron. What we try to do is look at the goal. So obviously Ohio State's a pretty big place. So we're saying what's the objective here? And so you talked about 1-pagers. I always say 1-pager front and back. So we get a little extra space in there. That's right. And then again, a lot of the meetings are actually 3 parts of the meeting. One is the preparatory part, just requesting the meeting so we can get some information ahead of time. So you have an informed conversation. There's the actual meeting, and then the follow-up. And then getting that so you're starting a conversation. So it takes the pressure off of them to say, I got to try to talk about quantum science in 20 minutes. So they try to, by the way. It's really interesting. So the more I learn about quantum, the less I learn. So anyways. We had another question.
No. I was just going to say, I remember the time when you called the scheduler in the congressman's office.
Right.
You know the scheduler. They will always take an appointment with a constituent, but if you're with another lobbying group or if you have another issue that does not directly affect either their committee assignments or they are actual constituents, you do have a little more trouble. But it's much different now. Everything is computer generated. But it used to be more personal.
Yeah. Other questions?
Yes. No. Just talk about a little bit about advocacy in McLean Baptist Church. I mean, Paul, your dad was one. How many other advocates do we have in his generation? And how many advocates do we have now? And now with Dan's son, we have the next generation, because we have a couple in that generation. So how many were there in your dad's generation?
In this church, probably lots.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said when I started, there's so many people here who could give this. We drew the short straw. We're giving this lesson today. But yeah, I mean, my dad brought us to this church when I was 6 years old, and so it was always like that's just part of the deal. He's a faithful and ethical man.
how do we advocate within our church for something we would like to see, would like to have? How do we advocate within McLean Baptist Church?
With whom? On what topic?
Well, depending on what we would like to, whatever it is that we're advocating for, what?
We have all those committees, wouldn't you go to a committee?
No, we're over committees. I think one of the challenges,
On your
What's the old saying? If there's 3 Baptists in a room, you'll come out with 4 different decisions. So I think there's like, what do we advocate on? We have that challenge too at Ohio State and other places. What do we want to talk about? What are our issues? What's our tactics? And what's our strategy? So I think in this room here, I think all of us would have 1 or 2 issues, and they may be the same and others may be different. You talked about all the different churches you work with, Jennifer, and just the diversity of opinion. So I think it's hard. I don't have an answer for you, but it's difficult. I don't know, as a church, I can't remember where McLean Baptist Church has actually advocated on a particular issue as a church. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe, is there?
So how about through our actions and share? I mean, we're not necessarily advocating, but our actions through share by providing them the space and volunteers to work it says that we care about our community. I mean, it doesn't have to be verbal. It can be through our actions and what we're doing and what we're representing.
It's the dancing down there.
There, I mean, there's a reason I put that in there. So, so yeah, I mean, but it would be the same skill set. Like, you know, who has the power to make the change? Is it the pastoral team? Is it lay leaders? Is it, you know, Sue Ellen, and we just need to get her on our side and she can do it for us? You know, so it just, so, you know, so, you know, so one of my jobs as the director of advocacy for a denomination is to demystify advocacy. A lot of my people are scared of the word. It feels like something that other people do. It feels like something that is outside of me. But it's not. Again, if we can have a conversation, we can be an advocate. And kind of to your point earlier, like, we're talking about legislative advocacy. That's what we were asked, you know, to speak about. But advocacy is bigger than legislative advocacy. And so, like this T-shirt I'm wearing is one of my fundraisers for my department, and it's a form of public witness. So when my people wear this shirt to the grocery store that said, "For God so loved the immigrant," they're making a public statement, right? And that is a way to advocate for your neighbor. It doesn't have to be a confrontation. It doesn't have to be a C-SPAN knockdown, drag-out fight that we see. But so many of my people who are outside of the Beltway, that's what they think advocacy is. They think it's a fight. They think it's a confrontation, and they think you have to know everything about every little detail. And so they're just going to leave it, you know, to someone else.
We're drawing to the close of our time. Who has a question? You know, we maybe can take 2 questions. An observation. No?
Great job. Great
Yeah.
job.
We are very appreciative of all of you who drew the short straw. Thank you so much for stimulating our thinking about our faith and its development in the way we advocate. And what I heard you say, we can advocate in any organization we are a part of. Whether it's Virginia citizenship, whether it is membership in McLean, whether it's whatever organization you're in, you can be an advocate. You can have your thoughts and your wills enacted for the welfare of the whole. And so we thank you very much. And thank you for coming.